Let's learn about the true nature of God because Matthew wants to know if I have any recommendations about the topic of God/higher power itself, and I do have 10 books which I'm going to recommend in this video, but let's begin with two very important books. At least 5 billion people would agree that these are very important books. We've got 3 billion Christians represented by the Holy Bible, and 2 billion Muslims represented by the sacred Quran. These holy texts are incredibly important places of worship, faith and devotion for over half of the world's population, and we can't go into a video about the true nature of God without paying respect to what I believe to be an incredibly important, very different, sometimes the same, but very important, very different, very distinct foundation of godliness, because our conversation about God, spoiler alert, can never really be a conversation about God itself, herself, himself, itself. We're always talking in circles. We can never get truly to the penetrative core of what it means to be in contact with God. And I've learned this through my journey over the years. We can only ever talk around God. As soon as you believe that you've grasped the essence of godliness, you're actually probably filling yourself with hubris, because we are humbled by the nature of the divine. Here I am talking nice and proud and nice and holy, but it wasn't always like this. I was raised in an atheist household by a father who was raised Catholic, and he rebelled in his teenage years, but I always had the feeling of not being all that impressed by my hedonistic and often pessimistic father when it came to his lack of spirituality. So naturally, I rebelled in my own way, and when I went off to university, I joined a nice Buddhist meditation group, and by the time that I was 19, I was meditating for up to an hour per day, went on a retreat or two, and did a variety of very intense Eastern-style inspired practices. Led that through for many years, mainly New Agey, Eastern-style things here and there, as is most difficult, crazy journeys from atheist to religious. We usually go for what's presented to us. I saw what was on the internet. And then this year, I read the Bible and the Quran cover to cover during my 3 weeks offline for my birthday, because that's what I want to do with my time off from client work for the first time in 3 years. The first time that I've taken more than a week off from one-to-one sessions, and I decided to spend the 3 weeks reading the sacred text cover to cover. So why have I done this? Why does my journey matter? And why does this relate to the topic of the true nature of God? Well, I've learned firsthand that we cannot get to the core of godliness because our understanding to God is a relationship to God which is built throughout a lifetime. And if you see any videos on the internet of someone who goes from New Age back to Christianity, or Christianity to Muslim, or Muslim to Christian, and then a few years later they seem to be swapping here and swapping there, there's a certain trend that you can notice where maybe it's best to say, I'm humbly learning as much as I can about the nature of God, and I seem to be leaning in a Christian direction, or a Muslim direction, or a Hindu direction, or a Buddhist direction, or maybe just a agnostic scanning, and not becoming too overcharged, because the psychological trauma as it relates to the spiritual wound of godliness tends to be an over-exaggerated inflation and deflation response. This is why when I've worked with people from Christian backgrounds, Catholic backgrounds, Protestant backgrounds, Southern Baptist backgrounds, Mormon backgrounds, and also people raised in Islamic traditions in the Middle East, I've had a few clients from there, there's such a deeply sensitive space that we need to be aware of. I am not the man to give you the answers about the true nature of God. How could I possibly be so arrogant to even give you any suggestion of where you would build your own relationship with God? Your godliness is a process. It's a process of coming into contact with something larger than yourself. I know for myself firsthand, I did not feel that fingerprint of divinity until I started devoting time as a 17, 18-year-old to meditating. And once I went through the meditation spiral, I naturally got closer to that stillness and supposedly the voice of my soul, but even then, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. I do have 10 books to hold up in this video. I have the Bible and the Quran, which I recommend that you study, but I also have a variety of books to educate you and also give practical guidance. I'm going to go into them in just a second, but I need to be abundantly clear. Godliness is not something that we can fully grasp as human beings. I have spent a decade looking into these questions, and I have spent many, many, many hours reading different texts from around the world, and I am nowhere near as bold to say that I've got it figured out, and I'm always a little bit suspicious, even though I do truly respect the conviction of people of faith when they've chosen their faith or they were called to their faith. I have complete respect for that path. But I'm always a little suspicious when it comes to strong conviction followed by condemnation of other paths. Usually the sign of someone who's truly in contact with that supposed true nature of God is a Muslim man or a Christian woman who can compassionately, open-heartedly say, I love my Muslim brothers, or I appreciate my Christian sisters. They can say that without a sense of condemnation. We're not going back to the Crusades, we're not going to the Holy Land to retake Jerusalem, we're actually learning how to live together and honor each other's faiths. I think that's a really important element that needs to be present in this conversation, because if you start to notice that you do that in your own religious journey, your own coming to faith experience, where for a few years you feel like you're a Buddhist and then suddenly you're a Christian and ooh, Sufism looks attractive, but wait a minute, what about that non-duality stuff? Maybe you can notice the subtleties inside of yourself where you start rejecting and repressing and disowning certain faith-based principles which you've outgrown or moved beyond. Noticing what's happening out there in the world and noticing what's happening inside in your inner world is going to give you a much clearer journey ahead for finding something like the true nature of God. I'm going to give you some resources to go into. Let's start with some educational books, and then I've got 3 books to catch you in your own hubris, arrogance, and self-inflation. We'll come back to those in a moment. Rapid fire round. If any of these books appeal to you, please buy them. I'm holding them up for a reason. There's about 40 or 50 books in this room I could have held up. I chose just 10, so let's go with these. The World's Religions by Houston Smith, widely regarded as the single best source for open-winded, kind of like introductory to all the world's religions. It is literally what it says on the cover, covers the world's religions. If you haven't studied a book like this, go for it. If you're interested in the internal experience, then go for William James, the famous psychologist, and his varieties of religious experience. That's very much the psychological dimension. If you're looking to collapse it all together, then go for the transcendent unity of religions by a man whose name I still can't say, Threechoff Schuon. He's a very famous transpersonal philosopher. I cannot say his name, so that's up to you. We've got a bit of Christian mysticism. If you're born into the Christian faith, I recommend you go for John Sanford and The Kingdom Within, the Inner Sayings of Jesus. And finally, we've got a nice book on Christian mysticism. You can see that I'm slightly biased towards Christianity, clearly. I wear a cross around my neck. This is the tradition that I was born into, even if it was rejected from a family environment. I stay with the basic tradition. You find many avenues to God. That's beside the point. Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. I've actually got a wonderful old hardcover copy there. Hopefully it comes up. I don't know if it did. Doesn't really matter. It's a fantastic book, one of the best books on mysticism that literally exists. It's widely recommended. My energy is lost even bringing up these books, because the reality is that books aren't where you're going to find your relationship with God. Even the holiest of texts, the Bible and the Quran, the various texts from around the world, I found that my relationship to God, that feeling of getting a little bit closer to the true nature of God, is found through silence and prayer, often in sacred spaces like a church, but I also very often out there in nature, just reflecting on the beauty of the world around us. And there's the key principle, trying to live a more faith-based life. I say grace for all my meals whenever I eat something, and often when I drink things, I'll say, thank you, just out loud. I'll say thank you, and I appreciate this, and thank you, God, or I'll send a little prayer to someone out there in the world. I've been doing this for maybe 5 years at this point, saying grace with all my meals in an open-minded, open-hearted, improvisational way, living in that kind of godly feeling of it's not about me and I'm connected to other people, and especially if I ever start to feel anywhere drawn towards the idea that I am God and I'm the center of the universe, which is a very classic New Age trope. Yes, there is something to be said for recognizing the divinity within you and that sense of being touched by something transpersonal and spiritual, but do not get so inflated to believe that you are God, and don't play the silly language game that all things are God, therefore I'm God, and this camera's God, and my bathroom toilet's God. It's an incredibly blasphemous and just incredibly ridiculous thing to do, because you're not properly honoring the divinity that you could aspire towards. If you're reducing God to everything, then God means nothing, and you can go into this non-dualistic death spiral towards all things being accepted. You can see me getting a bit agitated. But if we dethrone God, not from a puritanical, like holier than thou, it needs to be a punishing energy and you need to be cowering before God, but to have a healthy reverence of that which is larger than you, I think it's a bit of a medicine from this narcissistic culture that we live in. We were raised to think that we're the center of the universe, and consumer culture reinforces that, so let's just be a little bit careful about any time when we start to believe that we are holier than thou. And definitely if you believe that you are God, and everyone's God, it might be missing out on an opportunity to see what's behind that narrative construct. That's for you to decide. Maybe you're in a stage in your life where you really do need to believe that you're God for a while to get through a certain trauma healing journey. I'm not trying to take that away from you. But the main texts of the world religions would indicate that that's not quite the truth. So a bit more study to be done. But these are definitely a few books that we're going to go into that will help you with that. In fact, the most important book of this video is a book about spiritual grandiosity and arrogance. It's going to go in my course I'm working on, Halfway Up the Mountain. This book is over 500 pages of wonderfully well put together assault on all of the premature claims to enlightenment from many, many, many different contributors. I feel like there's something like 80 different perspectives and 80 different authors in this book. It is a fantastic read if you're looking for your like one punch, one stop kind of book to really get behind your own spiritual arrogance. It will humble you to the core, and you'll hopefully catch a few of those shadow patterns that are taking you off the rails. So, trigger warning, but also that's the point of doing inner work at times. It's to realize that you have got a little bit too much hot air up your rear end, and it's time to come down from the clouds and get back in touch with your limited knowledge and earthiness, because we all sometimes need to get down on our knees and pray to something which we don't know. It's often what we do when we're desperate. Why not do it when we're full of life and full of hope? Just be a bit more reverent. 2 more books to recommend. Integral Meditation by Ken Wilber. Hold this up first. There's many books in this video, almost a dizzying amount. The reason I'm holding this up is that Ken Wilber is an incredible integral philosopher, and having a reliable meditation practice is just a no-brainer if you're going to try and mine into the true nature of God. I spent maybe 4 years practicing nearly every day, varying intensity, sometimes 10 minutes at one period in time. I think it was 2 hours every day, and then I went and did a variety of things and would have a few months here, a few months there. And at this point, I try and live through that practice of saying grace and also the work that I do. I spend over 50 hours a month making free YouTube videos on topics related to trauma healing. And YouTube currently, at the time of making this video, pays me less for all of those 50 hours than even 1 hour in my private practice. So I try and live by some of these principles. I know my business also benefits, but the point is, live your life as an act of service. And even if you're working with mixed motives that you gain and others gain, maybe that's a good way to live something like a more righteous life, where your spirituality is actually powerful and creates something generative. You actually become a farmer who puts in the work and grows the field for other people to benefit from. You grow the crops, you put your spirituality into something living, and you help other people. I love how both the Quran especially, the Bible, yes, but the Quran especially goes into a lot about community. So much about charity, so much about community, so much about helping. I really like that. I think that's a wonderful principle for us to bring more of into our life. And if you want the final book for this video, we've got Essential Spirituality by Roger Walsh. I don't think I'm not afraid of the book. Maybe I am afraid of spirituality a little bit, but it's not coming up anyway. Essential Spirituality by Roger Walsh. And this is a very wonderful, practical how-to from a transpersonal psychologist who is very readable. If you're into the ideas around spiritual psychology, this is the book to read, as well as Integral Meditation by Ken Wilber. And I hope it's clear from this shorter than usual video that I do not want to pedestalize myself and take up your attention, because I'm still working out my own relationship to God, and I am not a priest, nor am I a mystic. So please do not take my word for it. And to some degree, I would advise, based on my bias, don't take the word of any independent book for it. And also be very, very, very wary of when you start to fixate on a certain identity and it's only been a few months of you coming into contact with that belief system. It might be the case that you have found your true religion, but it also might be the case, if you go on YouTube and just see how many people fall into this, that you found something that will work for a few years and then you drop off, and it's kind of a bit of a, I wouldn't say embarrassing, there's no reason to be embarrassed by it, but you don't need to pedestalize yourself to have faith. Faith is often very humble, very quiet, very slow. It's a smile when you're looking at the tree. It's a feeling of appreciation when you're with someone you love. And it's a feeling of being carried through on the dark days when you don't know if you can show up and do it yet again. That's a connection with God. And if you want to find the true nature of God, it's about your lived experience of godliness. No book, no man, no woman, no institution, no church, no synagogue, no mosque is going to give you that internal experience of coming into contact with God on your own terms throughout your life. You can lean into community and you can go into sacred spaces, but there really is such a thing as you and God as a private relationship, which is why all the sacred texts point to us having something like a karmic debt or something like a final judgment, where our life will be weighed up based on certain moral principles. That's the principle. That's the key element to focus on. It's you and God. And if you can bring that from raging against God to loving God and practicing a love of God as your daily texture, to whatever degree feels appropriate for you, but always striving to improve that relationship like a beautiful friendship with someone that you care about. That's really all I can give you in a single video. You're not going to get it from videos, you'll get some of it from books, but it's probably going to be built in your heart, in quiet, on your own, in a deeply receptive state. And just keep your ears open for anything you might hear. I hope this has helped nonetheless. I'll see you over in the next video, which I'm linking just because that's what you do at the end of a YouTube video, but frankly, just close off YouTube and go and sit in meditation is probably a much better use of your time.